Hirayasumi is a manga you've probably never heard of. Despite selling nearly 1 million copies in Japan in just 3 years, it remains largely unknown outside the country. It has also been recommended by many successful creators, including Inyo Asano, the author of Dead Dead Demons Dead Dead Destruction, and Erika Yoshida, the screenwriter of Bocce the Rock. The reason you've probably never heard of it is simple. It's not a brutal story about life or death battles, not a spine-chilling horror manga, and not another coming-of-age tale about a chosen teenager destined to save the world. Instead, Hirayasumi is an incredibly peaceful, slice-of-life manga. It follows Hiroto, a 30-year-old loser drifting through life. He has no real goals, no full-time job, and not even any particular ambitions. All he has is a small old house, a college-age cousin he looks after, and a simple life filled with simple pleasures. Good food, a warm bath, a beautiful view of the city streets, and carefree evening walks. At first glance, Hirayasumi seems almost deceptively simple, perhaps even boring. But to me, it's a work that genuinely, completely, and uniquely embodies happiness. And manga creator Keigo Shinzo came up with it after being diagnosed with cancer at the age of 33. Keigo Shinzo is a relatively young manga creator who published his first works in the early 2000s, while he was still a university student. Just a few years later, his manga Our Eruption Festival won an award at the Japan Media Arts Festival. The story follows two school friends whose lives are transformed after a dormant volcano erupts in their hometown. Even in this early work, you can already see Shinzo's fascination with everyday life and with the subtle emotions that are often difficult to put into words. In 2015, Shinzo released Tokyo Alien Bros, where he further developed his talent for comedy. The manga follows two aliens who take on the appearance of young men and try to adapt to life in Tokyo. Their attempts to blend in inevitably lead them into one absurd and awkward situation after another. However, Keigo's creative focus gradually began to shift, and his work grew darker. He created The Stray and The Weeds, the story of Hajime Yamada, an assistant police inspector, struggling with the loss of his daughter. One day, he takes part in a raid on a brothel. There he encounters Shiori Umino, who bears a striking and unsettling resemblance to his daughter. She has run away from home and is so desperate that she is willing to do anything just to avoid returning. It is a challenging work aimed at an adult audience filled with pain, trauma, and psychologically unsettling moments. The manga was successful as well. It was translated into French, where it received several award nominations and was recognized as one of the best comics of 2020. It seemed like the obvious next step for Keigo Shinzo, to build on that success and continue moving in a direction similar to Inyo Asano's, creating complex, tragic stories. But in April of that same year, Keigo Shinzo announced that he was putting the manga on hiatus due to hospitalization. He had never been particularly prone to illness, and the lump that had appeared beneath his ear had not bothered him at all. Still, after noticing that it was gradually getting larger, he decided to have it checked by a doctor. At first, he was told that it was probably a benign tumor and that there was nothing to worry about. He was admitted to the hospital for what was expected to be a routine operation, and the tumor was removed. But the diagnosis turned out to be far more serious. The tumor was lymphoma, a form of cancer. Instead of going home, Shinzo had to remain in the hospital and begin chemotherapy. And all of this happened in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, when visitors were not allowed inside. He could only see his wife for about 40 seconds at a time when she came to drop off supplies for him. It was a frightening time for both him and his family. And yet, the treatment itself passed surprisingly quietly. At some point, Keigo even began to feel bored. There was simply nothing to do in the hospital. He talked with other patients, but many of them were in poor condition, both physically and emotionally, and weren't really up for long conversations. So he spent his time drawing the meals he dreamed of eating once he finally got out of the hospital. He played board games by himself, despite finding them completely unengaging. And eventually, he began thinking about a new manga. Lying in a hospital bed and confronting his own mortality, he found himself wanting to create a manga about the joy of simply being alive. About walking through the streets, laughing with friends, enjoying a good meal, and watching clouds drift across a blue sky. He wanted to make something optimistic, something that could bring comfort to many people, including those who, like him, were fighting cancer. And so, from a hospital bed, the first chapters of Hirayasumi were born. So what exactly is this manga about? Ironically, the story begins with a death. The protagonist, Hiroto Ikuta, befriends an elderly woman who lives alone. Their friendship develops unexpectedly. He starts visiting her a couple of times a week, and they often share dinner together. At first, she mistakes him for a scammer, but gradually she grows fond of his kindness and sincerity. She watches him rescue a family of ducklings. At his encouragement, she rides a scooter for the first time in her life. And she even buys herself a new dress, the first one she has purchased in decades, and spends an evening dancing alone in her living room. But sadly, before long, the old lady passes away from old age. And in her will, she leaves her small, single-story house to Hiroto. At first, Hiroto lived there alone, but soon he is joined by his cousin Natsumi, who has just been accepted into an art college in the city. From that point on, the manga follows their everyday lives together: part-time jobs, university classes, friends, evening walks, and all the small moments in between. And that simple everyday life is exactly what the manga is about. Yet through these ordinary routines, each character gradually reveals themselves to be far more complex and nuanced than they first appear. We learn that Hiroto once dreamed of becoming an actor, and for a time he seemed to be on his way. He even landed several promising film roles early in his career. But the realities of the industry, the constant competition, the pressure to step over others to get ahead, the harsh treatment, and the sting of failure, were completely at odds with who he was. One evening he told his elderly friend that he thinks something is wrong with a world where people are considered failures simply because they aren't successful or important. So he left acting behind and now gets by working part-time jobs here and there. He's nothing like the kind of protagonist we're used to seeing. The one who gradually grows up, discovers his true calling, and finds his place in the world. In one storyline, Hiroto ends up acting in an amateur film, and before long he's offered a role in a major production again. In almost any other manga, this would be the moment when the hero dusts himself off, rediscovers his passion, and makes a triumphant return. But not here. For Hiroto, his current life isn't a setback that needs to be overcome. It's not a period of failure before the real story begins. It's simply the life he has chosen for himself. A quiet, deliberate decision to go with the flow. What's important, though, is that Shinzo never suggests that Hiroto's way of living is the only right one. He fills the story with characters who follow very different paths. Take Hiroto's cousin, Natsumi. She's far more ambitious and driven than he is. Her dream is to become a manga artist. Hiroto worries about the hardships she'll face chasing a creative career. He sees a lot of his younger self in her. But instead of trying to talk her out of it, he supports her every step of the way. Then there's Yomogi, who is practically a workaholic. She works for a real estate company and takes on endless overtime to afford a beautiful apartment overlooking the city. She rushes from one client to another, constantly on the move. In many ways, she's Hiroto's complete opposite. Yes, Hirayasumi is a story about finding happiness in ordinary moments. But Shinzo never argues that ambition, dreams, hard work, or personal goals are somehow bad. There's nothing wrong with being successful. The problem is when success becomes the measure of whether your life was worth living in the first place. But there is an unusual part. Even though this is a manga about happiness and the beauty of everyday life, Shinzo constantly pulls the reader back into the past. Through flashbacks, he repeatedly shows Hiroto's time with the old lady. It's almost as if he's deliberately reminding us that the house the characters live in, their quiet daily routines, and even some of the thoughts and feelings they experience exist because of what she left behind after her death. For all the peace and comfort in their lives, There's never a sense that the characters are frozen in time. You can always feel time moving forward, quietly but relentlessly. Old age, death, regrets, and uncertainty are never pushed to the sidelines. They're woven into the story from beginning to end. One of the manga's saddest moments comes when Yomogi decides not to visit her parents during the holidays because she's too busy with work. Then, the very next day, she learns that the elderly cat she had grown up with, her companion throughout her childhood, has passed away. So, how can Hirayasumi be described as a comforting or peaceful story? I think the answer lies in one of the manga's greatest strengths, how deeply Keigo Shinzo understands that sadness and happiness often exist side by side, and how remarkably well he captures the fragile boundary between them. Almost every chapter ends with scenes of the characters sitting on the porch at dusk or walking down an empty street at night. The landscapes they look out at feel melancholy, even a little lonely, and yet at the very same time, they feel calm, reassuring, and somehow deeply happy. Even the closing lines of many chapters read like short poems, trying to preserve the fleeting moments of a summer that is slowly slipping away. Perhaps that's what makes this manga so special. The way it holds death and life, sadness and happiness, fear and acceptance in the same space. The way it acknowledges loss, uncertainty, and the passage of time, while still finding joy in the simple fact that we are here. And maybe that is why Hirayasumi feels like such a genuine reflection of life itself, and of the quiet happiness that life, despite everything, can still offer us. Keigo Shinzo successfully completed his treatment, and today, his cancer is in remission. But the experience forced him to rethink both his priorities in life and the way he approaches his work. These days, he takes a much calmer attitude toward his career. He tries not to worry too much about sales or commercial success, focusing instead on creating the kind of manga he genuinely wants to make, at a pace that feels right for him. His daily routine is remarkably simple. He wakes up at 8 in the morning, has breakfast, and takes care of household chores. At 10, he begins drawing. Around midday, he stops for lunch and goes grocery shopping. After dinner, at around 8 in the evening, he relaxes and spends time with his wife. And every single night, he makes sure to take a bath. When he feels that he needs more time for his work, he isn't afraid to take it. In October 2023, for example, he put the manga on hiatus until January 2024, after realizing that he needed more time to think through the story. He wanted to make sure that once it was published, he wouldn't look back with regrets. He later wrote a separate one-shot about his experience with cancer, a surprisingly warm and gentle manga titled How I Was Hospitalized with Malignant Lymphoma. In it, he explains that despite all the fear, pain, and uncertainty he went through, the main thought that stayed with him afterward was this: I'm grateful that I had to go through that misfortune. Because without that experience, he might never have been able to create a story this meaningful. A story about how many precious moments our lives are filled with. How many small treasures pass unnoticed while we're busy chasing success, comparing ourselves to others, or worrying about who we're supposed to become. After all, what could embody happiness better than stars shimmering in the night sky, a walk in an unexpected rainstorm, an evening spent with close friends, cleaning a house that feels like home, your very first ride on a scooter, a homemade liqueur prepared by your grandma, or all those seemingly pointless things we do simply because we want to. There's a good chance you've never heard of Hirayasumi before, but I hope you'll give it a chance now.